Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today's fixing challenge is this computer which will not turn on. So it's not plugged in at the moment, but when it is, you press the power switch, absolutely nothing happens, not a flicker, no nothing. So in this video I'm going to try and fix it obviously, but I'm also going to take you through the steps that I would go through to try and diagnose this problem, starting from simple stuff up to more complicated stuff. Now I don't know what's wrong with this, so if we end up fixing it with one of the simple things, then it probably won't be able to go into so much detail on the complicated stuff because there's no point in taking it apart more than is necessary. But anyway, let's see how we get on. I'll take you through it as far as it goes, and we'll see if we can fix it. This computer's about 6 years old. It has very light use really. It's a Cooler Master Elite case, CIT power supply, Asus P8H61 mini ITX motherboard with an Intel Core i5 processor. So the first thing I'm going to do is just check that the complaint that's been reported to me is actually what's going on. You'll see to the side here I've got a power supply. This is actually a power supply that gives 12 volts and 5 volts. It doesn't take too much to spot that it's made from an old computer power supply. Might be useful for testing. I'm using it to run one of my video lights at the moment, but it might be useful for testing later on. Obviously got mains power here as well. So let's check that the complaint as put to me, which is that it's completely dead, doesn't do anything, is actually true. Switch on. Yep, I agree, completely dead. No fans, no flicker of life, nothing at all. So let's move on. I don't know what's wrong with this. I haven't pre-diagnosed it or anything, so I'm just going to go through the process that I would usually go through and see where we go. Might end up being quite simple, might end up going into quite a lot of detail. We'll just have to see. If it does end up being quite simple, I'll kind of talk you through what I'd go to next to try and fix things. So verify the problem. The next thing before we even open the case is to check that the cable and the fuse in the cable are all right. You can have cracking around this point where it enters the plug. The fuse in the plug might have gone, so before we do anything else and start taking things apart, let's have a look at that. So the way I'm going to do that is just swap this one for the one that's currently powering my power supply. So the lights will probably change a little bit while I do that. I know this power supply is working, so I'm going to do it this way round. Okay, so I don't know if you could tell because I was looking down here while I was doing it, but that cable's absolutely fine. The lights have come back on, that power supply is working. You can't hear it, but I can feel the fan. Okay, so the power cord's good. So the next thing to do is to remove the cover on this one. It's quite straightforward. Just these 3 thumb screws on the back. And I'm going to put it down just in case the cover slips and I drop everything. Just slides back. So it covers off. I've got my anti-static or earthing strap on here. It's probably overkill for this level of work actually, but just have it really. I put it on whenever I'm doing work like this. So the first thing to do once we've taken the case off is to have a look around and also give it a bit of a sniff. The reason I say that is just in case there's any real obvious smell of burning, a burnt electrical component, which there isn't in this case. So have a look around. Now this is quite tight inside here, so what I think I'm going to do is just take the screws off the power supply and slide it back so I can actually see through to the motherboard. Give the cables a bit of slack. We can put new cable ties on later. That's better. So now we can see the motherboard. Just looking for any obvious signs of any knackered components. So capacitors are probably going to be the main one. any signs of burning or bulging or bursting or anything like that, and I can't see anything. So the next thing to do is to check that all the connectors are connected securely, that they haven't become loose. This computer hasn't really been moved around much, so I don't think that's very likely to be an issue, but I'll have a check around. So down here we've got all the case connectors for the reset button, power button, beep, etc, etc, and they're important because that's going to be probably the next part of our testing. So if we put it on its side, so they're all on fine. Despite what I just said, now that we've moved everything around, let's give it another go to see if anything's changed. Absolutely nothing. Also, I don't know if you can see it, but just in there is an LED which should come on when the power's good from the power supply to the motherboard, just to say that the power's good. So that's pointing towards the power supply at this stage. But what I'm going to do next is just test out the switch, and a way to do that is to swap the reset button and the power on switch, because they're both just momentary push to make switches. So if we swap them over, it's quite unlikely that both will have gone at the same time. So if we swap them over, we can see what happens and then go from there. Okay, so I've taken the connectors for the beeper off, connectors for the LEDs on the front panel off. Now we're just left with two, those being the reset switch and the power on off switch. So I'm going to swap those round, then plug it back in, see if that makes any difference. And what we're doing there is we're testing whether the power switch has actually gone bad. So now the test is to power it back on again and press the reset switch and see if that does anything, excuse me. And if it does, you will see the CPU fan spin there, I hope. So press the reset switch. Absolutely nothing. Just press the power switch for good measure as well. Okay, so that moves us no further on, but at least we know it's not the switches that are faulty. In terms of where we want to go next then, what I really want to do now is have a better look at this power supply. And to do it, I'm going to take it out and I'm going to test it separately away from the computer. So we just need to put a small load on it. We need to bridge two pins to convince it that it's been switched on and see if anything actually happens. So let's do that now. So it's loose already. So secondary motherboard connector, main motherboard connector, disk drive connectors. There's just another one going to that disk drive in there. Another one going to one of the case fans. Are we completely free? Whoops. Steady on. No, we're not completely free. We should have another. Oh no, that goes on the motherboard. Right. Well, there's a couple of steps we need to take when we're testing a power supply. The first is we need to give it a signal to turn on. So the green wire here is that signal wire, and that needs to be linked to one of the ground wires, one of the black ones, which conveniently are just next door. So I've got a little jumper wire. Whoa. This is solid wire rather than stranded wire, and I've bent the ends over. They should sit quite snugly inside the pins there. Some power supplies also need a load, so you may have spotted what I'm going to use for that. This is my test light that I'd use for
well, testing a variety of circuits, more usually on cars I suppose, to provide just a little bit of a load if this power supply needs it. So just check that works. It does. We need to put the load on the 5 volt side. This is a 12 volt test light. Most power supplies, in case you don't know, they have 5 volt, which is red, 12 volt, which is yellow. They've also got a 3.3 volt as well. So this light's going to be quite dim on 5 volts, but it should give enough of a load for this purpose. So I've got some crocodile clips here to link those up. So the way that's going to go is one clip on the red, one on the black, plug that into one of these, making sure that the other wires aren't touching anything, which they are not. Let's just put that out of the way. In fact, I don't need that crocodile clip because the light's already got one. So that's the load for the power supply setup. The next thing to do is to insert this jumper wire between the green and one of the ground wires. Right. I'll be honest with you, I'm not expecting it to do anything, but let's see if it does. Yeah, absolutely nothing. I think we've probably got enough now. I'm fairly happy that we've got enough to say that this power supply is dead. I don't really like the idea, part of the reason I got into fixing stuff was to try and avoid how much stuff I throw away. Don't really like the idea of throwing the whole power supply away, but at the same time, if I take it apart and I can't fix it easily or it doesn't feel safe to fix it, then I will just end up getting a new one. So the next stage is to unplug it again and take it apart and see if we can see anything that's obviously damaged within the power supply. I was going to go into using a multimeter to check the 5 volt and the 12 volt rails. I was also then going to get into checking it under load, because it's all very well measuring voltage on the yellow and the red wires, but you need to check it under load. Now these power supplies can actually give out a fair bit of load, so what I'd usually do as a load for these is to try and run something like a car headlight bulb. I mean, this one at 12 volts, it alleges it can give out up to 27 amps, so you could actually run a couple of car headlight bulbs off that to give it a proper test, but we're nowhere near that because this one's absolutely completely and utterly dead. It's not doing anything. So I'm going to start taking it apart now and see what we can find. So in this case it looks like it's the power supply that's the problem, but I just thought I'd come back and say where I'd go next if it wasn't the power supply that was the problem. So if we'd done that test and the power supply turned out to be absolutely fine, where would you go from there? Well, one thing to try, it's fairly simple, is to replace the CMOS battery, which is that battery just down there. Put a new one in. It lasts a fair old while, but you could try that. The next thing to do would be to try booting it without any peripherals connected at all to see if it would boot up, even just to the basic BIOS. So in this case, disconnect the DVD drive, disconnect the hard drive, disconnect any of the USBs on the front panel or the rear panel, stuff like that. The next thing to do would be to try booting without taking one of the memory sticks out, so booting with just one of them, then swapping around, booting with the other one that you hadn't done before. At that stage, hopefully you would have a better idea as to what was going on, but at that stage you're getting into the sort of the more expensive end of the scale. Graphics card is another thing. This one's got onboard graphics, but if you had a separate graphics card, disconnect that, see if that made any difference. If you didn't have a separate graphics card, put one in, see if that made any difference. And at that stage you're really getting down to, is it the motherboard, is it the CPU? If it's the testing CPU is a little bit difficult, because with there being so many different sockets etc on motherboards, it's less likely that you're going to have another motherboard with the same socket where you could put that CPU in and test it, but that would be an option. swapping stuff around to get to the bottom of what's going on. In this case, it's looking like the power supply. So let's go ahead and take the power supply apart and see what we find. This power supply sort of lives half out of the case because the case is quite small. So it's got this little frame on it to hold it in position. So take that off. Just working out where to go next with it. So I think it's these screws in the top actually. Just take the warranty sticker off. I think we're quite a long way past that, so not really too concerned about it. Now, are there any more holding it in place? So I thought it was going to come out with the fan, but it turns out that the fan is stopping it. Take that out of the way for now. Okay, so got the cover off. I've had a look round, tested the fuse. What I was hoping to find was an obviously damaged diode or an obviously bulging capacitor, something like that. But unfortunately I haven't. And that means that to do some proper testing on these things, a lot of them actually have to be taken off the circuit board. Now, I'm afraid to say I don't have the time to go into that, so I'm going to harvest what I can out of here in terms of minimising waste. So these heat sinks are quite useful for LED projects and other sort of projects and stuff. Obviously recycle the metal and the wire, keep some of the connectors for testing other things, but I'm afraid the rest of it needs to go. So I'm going to order a new power supply and fit it, and then I'll come back and I hope I will be showing you the computer working. Okay, a new day, a new power supply. EVGA 450BT. Really nice power supply, much nicer than the one that was in there before, I got to say. I've used one of these before, really good quality. It's 450 watt as you can tell. So I'm going to install it loosely and then just test it, check everything works, and then put it in properly, tie up all the cables, all the ones we don't need, that sort of thing. I'm going to put the fan facing up, although it will be quite close to the top of the cover. You can see the cover is very well perforated here, so there'll be plenty of airflow. Well, that's a VGA graphics card one, so we really don't need that, so get that out of the way. At last we can see what we're doing. Line those up. Some motherboards are 20 and some motherboards are 24, which is why those four come separately. I'll cable tie one of these out of the way because we only need one of them. Fairly self-explanatory which way round they go, because the tab corresponds with the tab on the side of the socket. Alright, what else do we need? Some power for that. I'm actually going to use a separate, there's two SATA two pairs of SATA connectors. And that one isn't going to stretch around to where the hard disk is, so I'll use a separate one.
Right, is there anything else I need to plug in? I don't think there is. Let's check they're out of the way of the fan. So first thing I'm going to do is just switch it on. Don't know if you can see that LED? Hopefully you can. That wasn't happening before, so already we've moved forward a step. That's the LED to show that the power is good to the motherboard. So before we even start, we're looking like we're heading in the right direction. Okay, let's switch it on. Whoops. Let's switch it on again, and this time not have a wire caught around the CPU fan. I'll use the tie that came with the power supply temporarily to just hold that out of the way. Right, nothing else there, good, let's try again. Right, much better. And I've got to say, that power supply fan is super quiet. That's lovely. This computer has got a solid state drive, so it's really quiet. Really, you can hardly hear it at all, which is great. What I'm going to do now then is just plug in a screen just to check that's working. I'm pretty sure this is booted up fine, but it'd be nice to actually see it on a screen. Okay, so you can't see the screen obviously, but I can, and it's all booted up absolutely fine. This is a dual boot Ubuntu and Windows 10. It's booted into Ubuntu because that's the one it goes into first. That's booted absolutely fine, so this is fixed. It was the power supply. So now it's a case of tidying up all this mess as best we can and fitting the power supply into the case. As you remember, the power supply doesn't go right into the case, it kind of hangs out the back a little bit because this is quite a tiny case. Another reason I put this power supply in with the fan up, even though that means that the writing on the side is upside down, is because the cables come out of this side and there's more space down this side of the case than there is down this side. There's a fan here. There's more space down this side of the case to have the excess wires. So when it's in, it's going to be around about there. One of the things I said I was going to do was just tie up this second CPU supply out of the way. That one's twisted. So I'll bring the excess from that one to there. This is one of those things where you think you've got them threaded in the right way, and then you just have another look at it and you realise you want it a different way, and then you unplug it and then plug it back in, and so it goes on. Maybe if you do this all the time for your job or something, you've probably got this down first go, but I don't, and I haven't. And this, I guess, is why it's good to use the reusable ties that come with things like power supplies. So you can keep changing how you've got the cables until you're happy with it. Okay, we're pretty much there. Let's have another look inside to check I've not missed anything. It's catching on the fan. Nope. Let's move that out of the way. That was just stopping that fan spinning for a moment, but now that's alright. you've probably gathered I'm not really into the whole making the inside of a computer that you can't see look like super amazing. If you are, that's great. That's not really me. So as long as it's functional, it's neat, it's not going to come apart, trap fans, anything like that, then I'm happy with that. So that all looks fine. Right, that's it, we're all done. It was the power supply that was stopping this computer from switching on. It very often is the power supply, to be honest, that stops computers from switching on, but if you go around assuming that and buying a new power supply, you'll get caught out one time when you buy a power supply and you happily plug it in and it was nothing to do with the power supply at all and you wasted your money on a power supply. So I hope this helps if you're in a similar situation of having a computer that doesn't turn on and you're wondering how to go about fixing it. We've been through sort of the simple steps to take, moving up to the more complicated. I'm aware I didn't get into sort of disconnecting hard drives and checking the motherboard and the CPU and that sort of thing. I hadn't diagnosed this one beforehand, so I just thought we'd go along and see where we got to. So it wasn't necessary to go to that level of detail, and I didn't really want to take things apart that didn't need to be taken apart. Anyway, as I say, hope it helps if you've got a computer that won't turn on. If you like this type of video, why not subscribe? Hit the subscribe button in the bottom right hand corner. That means you'll get to keep up to date with new videos that I post on fixing things. I post a range of videos about fixing stuff. It's not all computers, sometimes it's cars, sometimes it's bikes, sometimes it's motorbikes. Well, hopefully there's a bit of crossover that you might be interested in there. If you prefer written content, head over to the website andrewfixes.com. Apart from that, thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye!